Okay. So this diagram that we covered before shows you the life cycle in humans. We spend almost, our entire life cycle in this diploid phase, right? So it's called a diploid life cycle. So I mentioned that because that's kind of a precursor to these other life cycles that we're going to discuss here now. All right, so let's jump ahead to the first one on your diagram. Come on. I want it to move for me. There we go. Here we go. Okay. This diagram shows you a life cycle of an alga. Alga is singular for algae, algae is plural. Plants and all the algae have what we call an alternation of generations. So in other words, there's a diploid phase and a haploid phase. And you remember in animals, the only haploid portion we had was forming our gametes, right? We'll find out with some of the plants, it's similar to that, the higher level plants. But an alga is pretty simple as far as, the evolutionary chain goes. So what we're looking at here is this is called sea lettuce or alga. I don't expect you to memorize any one of these life cycles, but you should be aware that they're there. And I just want you to be able to tell the difference between the two. With these cycles, it's kind of difficult to tell where to start in the formation. So let's go over here. Gametes are formed, and we'll come back to that. Gametes are formed when they fuse. You have a zygote, just like you do in humans and mammals and so on, and animals. All right, so that zygote then goes through mitosis to develop into an adult, what we call a sporophyte. Phyte, P-H-Y-T-E, just means plant. So this green alga is very similar to a plant. So they're using the phyte here. The sporo part of this means that this organism, this diploid organism, is going to undergo meiosis to form spores. Sporophytes form spores. Easy to remember, right? So when that happens, now each one of these spores that are formed through meiosis settles into the bottom of the ocean, or whatever body of water we're talking about, and grows into an entire organism. Since the spore is haploid, the whole organism is haploid. It's weird, right? So we have these haploid organisms that in this case look just like the diploid version. It's not always the case, but in this time it is. Then those haploid organisms, which are called gametophytes, then go through mitosis to produce gametes. Since they're already haploid, they can separate out or go through the cell division process, and their cells that they're producing are haploid. So they produce the gametes, so they're called gametophytes. Okay, there's a male version and a female version because over here, when we form the spores, I don't know in this sea lettuce whether it uses an XY chromosome system to identify male versus female. I'm not going to research into that. We don't need to know that much detail, but there would be a male version spore and a female version spore, and they would each grow into what we call an adult gametophyte organism that then goes through mitosis to make gametes. Okay, so we alternate, and since it looks like there's about equal of the blue and the yellow here, so this type of organism is going to spend about half of its, all of the organisms in general. About half of them are going to be diploid at any one time, and half of them will be haploid. Okay, you would not be able to tell the difference if you saw them on the ocean floor like this, whether you had the haploid stage or the diploid stage. You'd have to do a genetic test or see what was released from it. Okay. These gametes are going to require water to find each other. So this would only happen in a moist environment so that they can swim to each other. Okay? Go ahead.
So once it
spores have the ability to grow into an entire organism. Gametes do not. That's about as best I can answer it. I'm sorry?
Spores can do mitosis,
Uh-huh.
but gametes can't.
Basically, yeah. That's one way to look at it. Okay?
Hi. It was just for the seed question.
All right. So this is one of the simpler ones. Again, about equal time in either the gametophyte or sporophyte phase. So you've got both things going on. All right, another plant now. Now remember when we did the plant differentiation of the different types of plants? We started with plant in general, and I don't remember where this was in your notes, but we split into two major categories. Remember what they were? I'll just draw it on the board real quick if you want to add this into your notes, but you do have this in your notes somewhere. Remember, plants we split into those that had a vascular system and those that didn't. So we have a non-vascular and we had vascular. Remember, the vascular was the vessels. Remember what their vessel names were? Xylem and phloem, right, xylem and phloem, good. The non-vascular, remember, they don't have any of those vessels, so they're going to be very small. An example would be the moss, which is what we're going to look at here on the screen. Vascular, then, let's just finish this while we're working on it, split into seed producing and no seed producing. So we had seed plants and non-seed plants. If they don't produce seeds, they produce spores. They need some type of a reproductive structure, okay? And then within the seed, so an example of your no seed would be ferns, okay? And then the seed, remember we further divided into naked seed and enclosed seed plants. And remember the names for those, the actual names? This one started with a G. This one started with an A. Nobody? Remember gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms were your cone-bearing things like your conifers, pine trees, and so on. Angiosperms are flowering plants. So what are their seeds enclosed in? Well, the flower forms, the flower gets pollinated, the ovary inside the flower grows into a seed that has what around it? Sometimes we can eat this enclosure. Fruit. Fruits enclose the seeds. All right, so flowering plants form fruits. Now, a fruit isn't always the fleshy fruit that you think of that you eat. It can be something like a helicopter off of a maple tree. That's a fruit because it encloses the seed. Okay, if you peeled away that little wing part of it, you'd see the seed in there. All right, so back to this. We're starting with the moss in that. Notice you have more yellow here than we have blue. What did the yellow represent again? The haploid version. The blue is the diploid version. So with something simple like moss, a non-vascular plant, they spend the majority of their time as a haploid organism. When you see moss growing on a tree trunk or on the ground or on a rock or whatever, it looks like kind of like a little carpet of green, right? That's all the gametophyte. That's all the haploid form. They're showing you one little one here, but these would be very tiny. You know, they're real small because they're relying on diffusion. There's a male and a female version of those, and when they go through mitosis, they produce the gametes, the egg and the sperm, which again, the sperm need moisture around so that they can swim to the egg. So you'll never find moss growing in a real hot, dry place. They're not going to survive, okay? But when the gametes are formed, fertilization takes place, you have a zygote growing, and that zygote grows into the sporophyte, the diploid version. And this only happens in the spring, so I'm hoping we can find some of this pretty soon. I've been watching the moss in my backyard to check and see when we're going to find that sporophyte version. And it only lasts, it's like this little thing that sticks up off of there, and it only lasts for a week or so, and then the sporangium at the top will burst open and release these spores, which are all haploid because they were produced through meiosis. Those spores then can all grow into individual little moss plants, okay? The sporophyte portion of this is completely reliant upon the gametophyte portion. So now they are not existing as two separate organisms like we saw with the sea lettuce. Now it's one organism that has these two versions, and sometimes it's at the same time. The sporophyte can only live if it's attached to the gametophyte. Okay, Adelina?
Is that why there's like, obviously like if you have a piece of moss, like a bunch of those little things, is it just because it releases like a bunch of spores?
Each one of those little things is one of these individual gametophyte plants, right, that all formed from a spore, that were all released, right, from this. Yep, exactly. So we're going to be taking a look at this. If we have a decent day next week, like I said, weather-wise, we're going to go out and find some of these things and bring them in. If we don't get a decent weather day, then I'll just find them and bring them in. If you want to bring some things in as extra credit, I'd love to have it. We need pine cones. We'll be taking a look. There's a male version and a female version of the pine cones. We need flowers. Something like a tulip or a daffodil would work the best. You know, one of those types of flowers where you can see the individual male and female parts. So a dandelion doesn't work real well, sorry. What else do we need? If you have any ferns at home or growing out in the woods near you, we need ferns and we need moss. So any of those things you are welcome to bring in, and I'll give you some extra credit for it, okay? You can bring them in starting tomorrow or Monday. See if you can find something over the weekend maybe. Well, if we don't go out Monday, then we'll probably do this Tuesday in class. So definitely by Tuesday, okay? All right. The next type of plant is the fern, which you see on our list over there is vascular, but it doesn't produce any seeds. It produces spores. So it kind of looks like there's about an even distribution between the haploid and the diploid, if you look at the colors. But now, instead of like with your moss, where your sporophyte grew and was completely dependent upon the gametophyte, and the gametophyte was the dominant phase, here they each have a dominant part to this cycle. So the spores are released. They each can grow into a haploid gametophyte, which is this flat type of big leaf. I have never seen one of these in the wild ever. So I don't know exactly what it looks like, but you can get a picture of it here. And then those gametophyte portions, notice they're both male and female on the same plant portion here. They're going to grow or go through mitosis and produce the gametes. Again, the sperm need to be able to find the egg, so they're going to need water in order to do that. So again, ferns will not grow in a real hot, dry environment. They're going to need some type of a water system to get there. Egg gets fertilized, grows into the zygote. Now the zygote is going to grow into your sporophyte, and the gametophyte now just kind of withers away and becomes the root system of the fern. Okay, and so this is the fern that you're used to seeing. And that fern now, this sporophyte, has the ability to produce spores through meiosis. And sometimes you see those little brown spots on the bottom side of your fern leaf. Those are the sporangia. And they'll each, like, they dry up and they release all the spores into the air, and then wherever they fall, they're going to grow back into a gametophyte, okay? So you've got two different life cycles again going on here. Moving over to our naked seed plants, the gymnosperms. Again, I don't expect you to memorize this entire life cycle, but look how much yellow you have there compared to blue. A lot less now. So you don't have that equal gametophyte and sporophyte form. So now we're getting more complicated. The less gametophyte stage you have, the more sophisticated the organism is. Okay. Here we have male and female pine cones. The male cone only, it looks like a little cluster of yellow. It's basically, it's just all pollen. They only last, I've been watching, hoping to find them. I haven't seen them yet on any of the conifers around me. Hoping I can find one. And once they mature and release all the spores, which would be the pollen, then they are going to fall onto the female cones. What you're used to seeing is a female cone. And there are ovules inside of that, so then the fertilization takes place inside. So each one of these, it looks like a little bird, but it's actually one of the scales of the pine cone. And each one then will form the zygote on there, which becomes your seed, but it's not enclosed in anything. The pine cone, the scales will open up and the seeds just fall out. Okay, so they're naked seeds, they're called. All right, and then each one of those seeds can grow into a new plant. What's that?
I thought that was a bird.
It does look like a bird, I know. What it's supposed to be is one of the little scales of the pine cone. Well, see, they're calling it the scale. And it's just one of these brown pieces. So when we look at the pine cones, if you pulled them apart, it would kind of have that shape to it. It's weird. What's that?
So they definitely did that on purpose.
To confuse you? Okay, and then the highest level of plants as far as evolution goes are the enclosed seed, the angiosperms, the flowering plants. So we'll be taking a look at the different parts, the male and female parts of a flower. And again, I don't expect you to memorize the whole life cycle here, but look, again, just like in mammals, you have this real short haploid stage where it's really basically just gametes that are being formed there. They have to come together to form the diploid zygote, which will then undergo meiosis to form the gametes again. Okay, so there's really no gametophyte stage here for the flowering plants. The pollen grains cannot grow into an organism by themselves, nor can the eggs within the ovaries grow into an organism by themselves. Okay, same with your conifers. So they're going to require fertilization. So the only true organism is in the diploid phase, just like you have with mammals. Okay. All right, questions about life cycles? Okay. The last thing on that packet then was the gametogenesis of humans. Gametogenesis is just one big long word that means the beginning of gametes, right? Genesis is the beginning of something, gameto, so standing for the gametes. Then we break that down into spermatogenesis, forming the sperm, and oogenesis, forming the eggs. So looking at the male reproductive system first, the only place that this process of forming the sperm is going to occur is in the testes. There are two of them located within the scrotum. And remember, they require a lower body temperature, a lower temperature in order for spermatogenesis to occur. And that's why the scrotum hangs down from the male body, because if it's close enough to the body, then the temperature is too high and it kills all the sperm. Okay? They're real temperature sensitive. So just hanging down from the body gives it just maybe a 1 or 2 degree difference, but that's all it needs in order to form this. So Once a male reaches puberty and the hormones, testosterone, and all those are being released, within each testis there are these curled up seminiferous tubules, and each one of those is loaded with these cells, these precursor cells that are going to go through this process every day. Okay? One of these diploid cells in the seminiferous tubules is going to start the meiosis process. At the end of meiosis 1 is called a primary spermatocyte. Again, all the details here, I'm not really that concerned that you know all of this. But you do want to realize the end result, of course. So this primary spermatocyte then is going to go through meiosis 2, and at the end of that you have these, they're called developing sperm cells, which are still kind of contained within another bigger cell. So they're not ready to be released on their own yet until they grow this tail. The differentiation process, they attach the midpiece and the flagellum, and now they're ready to be released. This whole process of spermatogenesis takes about 9 weeks in the male, and it continues his entire life. He will go through this process. So every day he's releasing sperm into, back up the seminiferous tubules, okay? Actually, the epididymis is where it finishes the process, but you don't have to know all the details. If they're not released from his body, they just die, and he reabsorbs the nutrients and makes them over again. So he does not have to release them. Don't let any guy ever tell you he's going to blow up if he doesn't have sex. Okay? It's not going to happen. Okay? So, but remember the 4 sperm that are produced from each one of these precursor cells. Are they the same genetically? All right, so about 9 weeks, and then the process is done. In the female, you know, oogenesis is only going to occur in the ovaries, and remember that started before she was even born. A female is born with about 400,000 of these primary oocytes that are stopped in meiosis 1. 400,000 is way more than she's ever going to need in her lifetime. So you're never going to run out. Every cycle, which varies 25, 28, 32 days, whatever your cycle is, every cycle, one of these primary oocytes continues on with meiosis, and it gets released into the fallopian tubes or the oviducts in the middle of meiosis 2. It's kind of stuck in metaphase 2. That will stay that way unless it gets fertilized by the sperm. When that happens, when fertilization takes place, then it finishes into your entire egg here, and then it will start to go through mitosis, form the zygote, and eventually implant into the uterus. Okay, so the fertilization normally takes place right around here. It's called the uterine horn. Okay. And then it has to travel the distance of the fallopian tube, and it's multiplying, dividing over and over again, going through mitosis, 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 2 cells to 4 cells to 8 cells to 16, it keeps doubling. And then after a few days, it implants into the uterus and will eventually grow that placenta and the umbilical cord to the baby in that connection. So until that happens, you need this big, huge egg with all that cytoplasm to provide the nutrients for all those mitosis processes. Okay? This will continue in a woman until she reaches menopause, because follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, is necessary in order for this process to keep going in the ovary, and that drops, as well as estrogen, during or at the menopause stage. And so once you stop producing those hormones, it's kind of like your ovaries they don't stop functioning completely, but they just stop making eggs. Adelina?
What happens, like, if the female
Yeah. Let me pause this.